Would you please pray with me? We know, Lord, that your word can be hard. Teach us that what is bitter can become sweet as honey. As we spend this time with your word, interpreting it, let us taste and see that it is good. Amen. In an essay entitled "The Glory and the Glare," published in a recent issue of the Christian Century, my former professor, Stephanie Paulsell, writes that Easter often feels to her like staring into the sun. Easter is so brightly lit that it can leave us dazed and blinking, she writes. So much light is its own kind of darkness, light inaccessible, as noted in the great hymn by Walter C. Smith. Especially after our eyes have adjusted to the interior penitential season of Lent and then to the dark events of Holy Week, how are we supposed to see in the glare of Easter? What can we see with the light in our eyes? It's understandable that even Mary Magdalene and Jesus' disciples cannot recognize the resurrected Jesus when they see him, and instead recognize him when they hear him, touch him, or eat with him. Fleeting as his appearances are, Stephanie Paulsell writes, "It makes my eyes ache to think of it, and my heart too, wanting to hold onto their beloved Lord, but unable to fasten their eyes on him. What will his followers do? What is there to do after Easter?" Well, Peter decides to go fishing. A man of action more than introspection, Peter decides to go back to the trade that he knows so well. "I'm going fishing," he tells the people he's with. And without an alternative plan, they say, "We'll go with you." Peter, Thomas, Nathaniel, James, John, and 2 other disciples all go back to their former way of life, back to their former trade. Wait a minute. What's going on? Are they leaving? Are they going back to the way things were? I wonder if this is what Jesus might have been thinking as he stood on the beach watching them in their boat the next day. After all that happened, the highs, the lows, were the disciples disbanding in order to resume some kind of normalcy? Seeing this, Jesus could have been offended or disillusioned by their seeming lack of loyalty, but we have no such indication. Instead, he calls out to them, has yet another meal with them, converses one more time with them, and in the course of conversing with them, what does he do? He gives them a reason to stay. In a TED Talk given by Juan Serrano, a business management consultant known for teaching companies about creating value and meaning, Juan Serrano addresses the phenomenon of customer loyalty. There's a lot of talk about loyalty these days, more precisely, the lack of it, he says. In a very competitive market, companies are always trying to figure out why their customers, even satisfied customers, leave. Research has shown that neither price nor claims can account for most of this phenomenon. Juan Serrano's hypothesis is that customers leave because companies don't give them reason to stay. Are you giving your people good reasons to stay, he asks. This question, he says, is worth asking not only with regard to customers, but also with regard to employees, spouses, and friends. All people are likely to leave if they don't have reason to stay. And just because you don't have reasons to leave doesn't mean that you have a reason to stay. Furthermore, Juan Serrano teaches that meaning should be given to people while it still makes sense for them to receive it. That is, before it's too late. Juan Serrano's hypothesis is informed by the writings of Viktor Frankl. Frankl was an Austrian Jewish neurologist and psychiatrist who survived the horrors of the concentration camps. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl wanted to understand what enabled people to endure even the most brutal experiences in life without giving up the will to live. What he discovered was that the people who survived were neither the most intelligent people, nor the strongest people, nor the people best trained with survival techniques. Rather, he concluded, they were the people who were able to find meaning in all kinds of situations, even the most brutal conditions. The people who were able to find meaning in all forms of existence were able to find a reason to continue living. Frankl, quoting Nietzsche, found himself strongly convicted that whoever has a strong why will be able to endure almost any how. Inspired by this insight, Juan Serrano believes that in some cases, a seeming lack of loyalty can be accounted more accurately by the lack of meaning. In John's account of what can happen after Easter, before it becomes too late, Jesus appears one more time. Before Peter and other disciples leave for good, Jesus gets their attention one more time and gives them a reason to stay. It is as though Jesus knows that Peter and the other disciples need help in finding meaning in their situation, meaning great enough for them to stay with one another, to stay with Jesus' mission, to stay the course. They need a reason to stay that will enable them to endure and not give up in the face of the hardship and persecution unto death that Jesus tells them that they will undergo. And they need a reason that they can grasp. In the glare of Easter's brightness, they need to know where to look, where to put their energies, what to do. So Jesus says to Simon Peter, the disciple who all along has forthrightly and earnestly professed his loyalty to and love of the Lord, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than everyone else loves me? Simon Peter responds, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Then Jesus says, feed my lambs. A second time, Jesus asks, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Again, Simon says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Then Jesus says, tend my sheep. A third time, Jesus asks, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Being asked this a third time, Peter felt hurt and says to Jesus, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. A third time, Jesus says to him, feed my sheep. About to go back to their old occupation as fishermen, Jesus gives them a new purpose and meaning to fulfill. All of us desire meaning for our lives. We want our lives to have some sense of significance. Where do we gain a sense of meaning? I suspect meaning comes when we understand our lives in relation to something else, something that is larger than ourselves. I would qualify this further by saying that I suspect meaning arises out of our relation to someone else, to persons for whom we have a responsibility, a loyalty, a love. People are qualitatively different from causes. That is why, in its wisdom, the church refrains from equating God to a cause, no matter how great and significant the cause might be. As Jonathan Edwards wrote and preached, God is a being with a heart. God is not some universal cause, some grand idea. God is conceived in our tradition as a person, to be addressed in the second person, as a you. Jesus Christ came to us not as a champion of a cause for the world, but as a person who calls forth our deepest heartfelt trust, loyalty, and love. Do you love me? Jesus asks. Do you love me more than anyone else loves me, or more than you love anything else? If you do, then you will have meaning. You will have a mission for your life. Feed my sheep, tend my sheep, care for my sheep. If you love me, love my sheep. When Jesus calls us to be loyal to him and to love him, he calls us to be in relationship with his people, all the people to whom he is loyal, whom he loves. This begs the question, who is Jesus talking about? Who are his sheep? When we read the Gospel of John, sometimes we find Jesus saying things like, I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Understandably, passages like this have led some Christians to conclude that John understood Jesus to have a more sectarian mission in mind, as though Jesus wanted us to care and relate to only some people and not all. This seems to me to be too small a view of Jesus's and God's mission. Somewhere in his great Summa Theologica, a 13th century theologian, Thomas Aquinas, likened the light that Christ shed on the world to the brightness of the sun that God created. Like the sun that, though it is too bright to be looked upon directly, makes it possible for everything else in all of creation to be seen. Christ, who himself in his resurrected glory might be light inaccessible, illuminates everything else so that all of humanity, not just a select group, can be seen as a new creation. When in the glare of Easter we do not know where to look, where to find meaning, and may even be on the verge of leaving, Jesus gives us a reason to stay the course and to follow him. Amen.